Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar on academic careers, academic assessment, and staff development. Today will be an opportunity to talk about academic assessment in a broader sense, but also in the sense of talking about the need in recent developments for reforms in how academics, their achievements, and their activities in higher education are assessed, specifically for career development, for career planning. But we will also talk about which specific staff development opportunities are currently being offered or not to academics in the field of learning and teaching in particular. So you might already notice from this little introduction that we will also see this webinar as a chance to talk about the parity of esteem and argue and advocate for a broader understanding of academic assessment and academic careers that takes all of the university missions, but specifically research and learning and teaching into consideration to an equal degree. Before I introduce the topics and our speakers for today, a couple of housekeeping rules. So you will notice that we are in the very familiar Zoom interface, which at the moment means that we do not have a specific Q&A function. Instead, if you have any comments, if you want to say hello to your speakers, to your fellow participants, if you have any technical issues or any other remarks, if you want to ask questions to the speakers, please do use the chat. My colleagues and I will regularly monitor it and make sure that we do not miss your contributions. So please do feel free to be active in the chat. You have accessed this webinar through our CVent event platform, and you might already have noticed that we are recording this webinar, which means that we will, of course, provide you with the recording after the webinar. So once the webinar has taken place, you will receive an email with all the slides and the recording to the webinar. You can then share this with your colleagues if they're also interested. But crucially, on the webinar platform, the materials such as the recording and the presentations will remain available if you ever log into it again in the future. And you can also use the webinar platform to interact with other participants if you would like to do so. Now, moving on to the reason why you came here, the topic of academic assessment and academic careers. So just a brief structure of the webinar. At the very beginning, we will introduce the topic, meaning why we are talking about academic careers and academic career assessment in the first place, and why we are doing it now. Just a little spoiler, we have had 2 ongoing activities based on surveys throughout 2024, and now we would like to offer you a little sneak peek into what results we found to spark a discussion about academic careers and staff development and how they take into consideration the different missions of academics and of higher education in general. First, we will focus on academic career assessment in particular. So for this part, I will hand over later to my colleague Rita Moraes, who is an advisor for research and innovation at EUA, the European University Association. She has among her lists of expertise, among her topics of expertise, research assessment and academic careers, so exactly the topics we will discuss today, but also open science. She is co-coordinating or co-chairing the CoARA working group on reforming academic career assessment. For those of you who are not familiar with CoARA, the acronym stands for Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, and I think it was in early 2024, even in late 2023, it started a working group precisely on reforming academic career assessment to evaluate which broader sets of evaluation criteria for academic careers there are in place, and how these assessments could be reasonably and usefully reformed for the benefit of academics and also higher education in general. So in this first part, we will talk about how assessment reflects the diversity of university missions and professional activities for academics. Then we move on to my other colleague here with us, Therese Zhang, who is the Deputy Director for Higher Education Policy at EUA. In her portfolio, we find higher education learning and teaching, as well as expertise in the Bologna process in particular, lifelong learning, digitalization, and internationalization. Therese is currently one of the colleagues here in-house at EUA who are coordinating an Erasmus Plus funded project called Staff Dev, which stands for Staff Development in Learning and Teaching at European universities. And she will talk to us about recent survey results that show how universities support professional development for teachers, for teaching staff in particular, and how this relates to recognition and career progression. We will have plenty of time for questions from you, so please do use the chat to share your questions. And you will then also be informed towards the end of the webinar which next steps await, both with the CoARA working group and with the Staff Dev projects, because there will be further opportunities to engage in the future. But for now, I hand over to my colleagues, Rita and Therese, for a little introduction to the context of our webinar.
Thank you, Ellen. So I will start. So as Ellen already hinted to in the introduction, academic careers are a very important topic for EUA, and they are a strategic priority. This is also linked to the importance of the core academic values of integrity, cooperation, and openness. And also the fact that the current, or a recognition that the current research culture does not recognize the diversity and the richness of research practices and contributions of academics. And so there is a need to develop research assessment approaches that focus on the broad range of scholarly outputs and outcomes, including quality potential, future impact, and also open science contributions. Next slide, please. So in some of our key documents, we've also at EUA emphasized that universities, they should provide a favorable environment for academics and researchers to flourish. And also we've advocated that R&I careers should be accessible to everyone, and that a long-term perspective is required to design flexible multiple career pathways, drawing upon professional career support services, lifelong learning, and skill development opportunities, and also mentoring programs. So there should be flexible and multiple career pathways that should be promoted with a long-term perspective. And these should also be supported by a foundation of adequate work-life balance and well-being, acknowledging and also enabling multiple transitions throughout life between the different sectors performing R&I activities, so in universities and also outside. I will now hand over to Therese, who will tell you a little bit more about some additional challenges.
Thank you, Rita, and hello, everybody, also from my side. Yes, indeed, I will address here a bit the repeatedly taught challenges that we have gathered here in a learning and teaching context when working on learning and teaching with our members. In institutions, we could see that institutions repeatedly identified a lack of recognition for teaching in career progression as a main and structural obstacle for the improvement of teaching as such at universities, but also more generally speaking for addressing this famous, or rather infamous, issue of parity of esteem with research, that research achievements are accounted for and often mandatory for career progression, and in any case are granted more prestige, let's say, in terms of career promotion advancement generally, but also generally speaking in terms of academic assessment, and also that reward recognition and professional development opportunities should be available through careers beyond the first years into the profession. I've put here some quotes from some of our studies, for example, the one here that also pins down the issue of time. So for example, time spent on innovating pedagogy, working on your own teaching is not always valued or valorized. And there might be institutional support measures. Regulations still evolve quite slowly, and also institutions pin down a better understanding of the academic profession and the variety of missions that it is required to fulfill as needed from the policy making side, and sometimes also from the leadership side at their institution. Next, please. Another point that is closely related to that one is really that the academic profession has also evolved in the past years, resulting into increased workloads and pressure to achieve diverse tasks and addressing multiple university missions. So you are required to be good in research, but also in teaching, so demonstrate what you do for service to society, but you're also sometimes required, and it's well seen, let's say, if you coordinate projects, if you engage in the university's community, if you engage into transnational collaboration, etc., etc. This has resulted also in a wealth of pressure, let's say, put on academics. And moreover, and that's something we've heard much in the immediate aftermath of the pandemic, the pressure on teachers to deliver during the pandemic has also resulted on the kind of teaching fatigue on their side. And generally speaking, this has formed also a core challenge to be addressed in the next years. Next, please. And I think it's back to Rita.
Thank you, Therese. So as Ellen already told you in the introduction, today we'll share with you some results from the CoARA working group on reforming academic career assessment. But before that, we just wanted to give you a few more details about CoARA and this working group. So CoARA is the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment. It has now over 700 members from Europe, but also beyond Europe. And CoARA is, or the basis of CoARA is the agreement on reforming research assessment, which you have there on the slide. And this text establishes a common direction for the reform of research assessment, outlining shared principles, 10 commitments, and a time frame for reforms that organizations that sign the agreement and become CoARA members commit to. So the text was published 2.5 years ago, and CoARA was formally established 2 years, so back in December 2022. And CoARA, the main vision of CoARA is about recognizing the different outputs, practices, and activities that maximize the quality and impact of research. Within CoARA, there are different working groups working on different topics, bringing together the members to reflect on these specific topics, and EUA is coordinating one of these working groups. Next slide, please. So EUA is coordinating the working group on reforming academic career assessment, which aims to broaden the reflection on research assessment to academic careers. So the scope of this group is larger. The group is, or the group's premise is that academic career assessment systems should adequately reflect, and by reflect we mean assess, the different tasks, the functions and roles academics fulfill over the course of their careers. And so really the aim is to then broaden the reflection to academic careers and recognizing the full scope and all the activities of work conducted by academics in research, but also in teaching, innovation, leadership, and service to society. Next slide. So the work of the working group is basically divided in 2 different phases. So the first phase is now coming to the end. So it was developed during this first year of the working group that, as Helen mentioned, we started working end of 2023. And it's about a targeted mapping of initiatives on academic career assessment taking place at institutional and national levels. And these activities comprised a collection of case studies that focused on national level initiatives, a large-scale survey, and it will also include a short synthesis of the lessons learned from these two exercises. And today we will show you some results from the survey. And now phase 2, which is what the working group is starting to work on, and it will continue during the next year, is that we're aiming to develop a toolbox for academic career assessment for institutions. And so these are the main goals and the main activities of the working group. And we will come back to the survey results in a few minutes. And then I hand over again to Therese.
Thank you very much, Rita. I will just briefly present the project under which we conducted that survey. And in our case, it's, as Helena said already, it's a project specifically dedicated to staff development in learning and teaching. It's an Erasmus Plus co-funded project. We just started this year, but it will run until 26. UA is the project coordinator there, but we are in really good company here because we are also working with the 4 project partners that you can see there. So UCC, University College Cork, Royal University of Bochum, Utrecht University, and the University of Oslo. And we are also accompanied in this project by an advisory board that can also provide us with diverse and also complementary expertise on that topic. Next, please. Yes. So the overall idea also is to engage into what we could call an ecosystem approach. So how to combine career stages with the idea of career progression and a sense of community building and development that is supported at institutions. This is about developing assessment methodologies and approaches that could be widely accepted, but also incentive systems, including formal training, and also opportunities to build and take part in communities of practice in teaching. So basically that there is this space really there to converse about learning and teaching practices, etc. We also, in the project, try to adopt an evidence-informed approach. What works exactly? How do we know that it works? But also, how do we contrast the different types of practices and examples? And this has started with a mapping of existing practices. And I will present you later on precisely the findings based on that. And finally, it's also the idea of combining top-down and bottom-up approaches. So steering needed from the institutional leadership and also from national levels, with this openness to consider grassroots level initiatives that sometimes are really built up from individuals' initiative and from some groups' initiative. Thank you. Next. Yes. I'll just give a very quick overview of what we are doing in the project and the project objectives. I already mentioned the mapping, but also the idea is to support at the same time institution in designing and developing staff development and exchange on how they do it. And at the end of the project, we will try to draw some lessons, hopefully useful, to be shared with the sector, with the institutions, but also with policymakers, notably at European level. So I will not lose time on the overall work package organization of such project, but just to say we are currently finishing work package 2 dedicated to knowledge and evidence base. And as from very beginning of next year, and I will have the opportunity to go back to that later on, we are starting the work package 3, which is really about practice sharing, capacity building, and there will be open opportunities for institutions to take part in this. Thank you. Next. And I will handle back the floor to Rita.
Yes, indeed. Thank you both for outlining the context and your activities, which we will have a look into in more detail as we continue. So for now, I will hand over to Rita, who will tell us more about what CoARA has been up to with the working group on academic career assessment. And she will tell us more about how assessment practices today reflects the diversity of university missions and professional activities for academics. Over to you, Rita.
Thank you, Ellen. So we have a quick poll for you. Let me just see if I can share the share the slides, and if my colleague can launch the poll. Okay, I think the slides are coming up, and I hope you can see them now. So we have a quick question for you that was also actually included in the survey we conducted. So is your organization planning, initiating, or already implementing a reform process on academic career assessment? And so I see some of the results are coming up. So for most of you, it seems to be a yes, with about 70%, followed by far from the no's and the I don't know. So this is quite interesting, and it also resembles the results we found in our survey. So let's start then with more information about the survey and the results. So in short, the survey aimed to gather information on institutional and or organizational level initiatives that aimed to broaden the criteria and the methods for evaluating the outputs and impacts of academic activities for the purposes of recruitment, higher performance evaluation, and progression of academic staff. It was addressed to universities and research organizations worldwide. They did not need to be CoARA members to participate, so it was open to all organizations. And we really wanted to get answers from those organizations that were either planning, initiating, or already implementing a reform process on academic career assessment, either at the university level or organizational level, or at departmental or unit level. So the survey ran last winter and spring, and in the end, we received 236 valid responses from 41 countries, most of them from Europe, but we also got a few answers from other countries. So in terms of the profile of respondents, most of the respondents were universities, so especially comprehensive universities. We also had about almost 15% of research organizations participating, and then also technical or applied sciences universities. Most of them, 80%, were public organizations, and the majority focusing both on research and teaching. And these tended to be typically large organizations, so 43% at over 1,000 research staff as FTEs. Most of our respondents were also CoARA members, but not all, as you can see there. And so one of the first questions we ask is exactly the same question we put to you in the poll, is whether these organizations were undergoing some reforms or were planning to undergo some reforms. The vast majority said yes, so about 82%. And amongst those that said no, we've asked them about the reasons for not doing this. And so some of them, they pointed to national regulations and low levels of autonomy of universities. Some of them were not sure why their university was not undergoing some reforms or considering them. They also mentioned constraints in terms of resource and capacity, so with limited time or staff. Some mentioned that they had implemented recent reforms, and so they were trying to evaluate the outcomes of those reforms before embarking on yet another reform exercise. And a few of them mentioned that they were satisfied with the current systems, and also a few of them said that there was just general resistance to change. But overall, most of the respondents, they were undergoing some reform process or at least planning them. And so all the answers you will see from now on in the results, they will only include this group of organizations that were either planning or already implementing some reforms. So we've asked these organizations in which stage in academic career assessment reform they were. And so about 18%, as you can see here, said that reforms were being considered, but the institution had not decided on what they were going to do exactly. But then the majority, so almost 44%, said that the reform processes were foreseen and they were being planned, but the implementation had not started. And then about 38% in total. So if you collapse these two percent of organizations, they said that the reforms were already being implemented or were well established at the time the data were collected. So we've asked organizations why they were engaging in these reforms on academic career assessment. And again, to remind you that this is not just about research assessment, but really about academic career assessment. So also including these other areas like teaching and innovation. And from this open-ended question and from the comments, we clustered these comments in these different categories, as you see here. So the most often motivation pinpointed by universities were that was that they wanted to offer a more diversified and fair set of evaluation criteria. They also wanted to establish more transparent practices of assessment and career progression. They wanted to guarantee high research quality. Some of them, the motivations also were related to wanting to implement open science principles, considering staff well-being, and also making the organization as a more attractive employer for academics and aligning these institutional initiatives of reform with other national or international movements of reform or regulations. In terms of the development of the reform process itself, we've asked organizations which groups inside the organization were the main responsible for initiating the reforms. And here, as you can see, most of them indicated that the organizational leadership, followed by research management and administration staff, were the main initiators of reforms inside the organization. And academics were also involved as initiators, but much less so than these other groups. And then we've also asked which groups inside the organization were showing more resistance to reforms. And so about 40% of the respondents, they said that there was no resistance in the organization. And this could perhaps be explained by the fact that they were already developing these reforms or were thinking about doing so in the near future. But then apart from this category, the group that was identified as being apparently more resistant to reform were senior academics, followed by mid-career academics. And here it's also important to mention that most of the respondents to the survey were at the high-level leadership of universities. So these were the people that were, in most cases, replying to the survey. So this is their perception on the resistance from senior and mid-career academics. So we've also asked them the reasons for this potential resistance, and the reasons were very similar for senior and mid-career academics, and they were mainly related to a general resistance to change and fear of the unknown, and also fear about the transition period, so not knowing exactly what was going to happen. Also some uncertainty and some questions or doubts about qualitative methods and how reliable they are and how good they are at capturing quality for assessment. They've also pinpointed to the tradition of using metrics and some ingrained preference for quantitative measures, so for numbers, which are not so clearly obtainable, let's say, with qualitative methods or with other methods for assessment. Some also pointed to the lack of understanding of change, and this was related to the differences between some scientific areas in which, in many areas, these quantitative methods are used, and people don't see the problems that this can create in other areas or in using the same metrics in other areas. And finally, there were also concerns on the increased workload for those assessing and for those being assessed in the transition to a new assessment system. So we've also then asked universities what was the role of academic staff in the reform process. And the majority of institutions indicated that either academic staff or their representatives, they were actively participating in the discussions on reform and in developing new processes for academic career assessment. And only in a minority of cases, not really having an active role in the discussions or in the development of the new processes. We've then added a few areas that are typically considered in academic career assessment, and we've asked institutions what was the level of importance of these different areas currently or before the reform had taken place, and what did they expect to happen after the reform took place. And so as you can see here, research, which is here on the top, it is the activity that is by far the most valued or the most considered as most important currently, which is here the dark green light. And as you can see currently, the other areas, so even education, innovation, leadership, etc., they are either moderately important or really low in importance compared to research. But what is expected to happen after these reforms take place is that research will continue to be important, but all the other areas are expected to increase in importance, which is really not what's happening now. And then we've asked them a similar question to this one, but instead of considering these more general areas, we provided some potential indicators for assessing academic careers that can be used. And we've asked them again the same question. So what is the importance of these different types of indicators currently or before the reform takes place? And what do they expect to happen after the reform takes place? And as you can see here on the top right, here you have the indicators related to the publications, so especially metrics and number of publications and acquisition of funding, which are currently, again, by far the most considered as the most important. And then all the other areas are, again, either only moderately important or considered as really low in importance. So as you see here in the dark green light. And after the reform takes place, the importance of metrics, for example, is supposed to decrease. So here it's the same chart, but just with the highlight of the decrease. So metrics, the importance is expected to decrease, as well as for the number or relying on the number of publications. And overall, all the other indicators, so related to open science, for example, or to teaching, collaborations, innovation, they are expected to become more important to assess academic careers in the future or after these reforms take place. And the largest increase in importance are noted here in gray, were seen on open education materials, open science, and science communication. So, and just to finish this part, we've also asked institutions what were the main achievements that they had seen in their reform efforts. And of course, many of them said that it was still too early to assess the effects of the reforms they were implementing, because these were recent reforms and there was not yet enough time to assess the effects. But several of them provided already some potential effects that they were seeing from the reforms. And again, we've clustered their comments into these areas. And the most frequently mentioned was that these reforms really were instrumental in raising awareness and in raising the engagement of different stakeholders inside the institution. So they've said that these reforms really helped to increase the discussions and also the consensus building. They have also indicated that these reforms provided more alignment with other reform initiatives at national or international level. They serve to increase transparency and clarity in criteria and in assessment guidelines. They also served to enhance career support and the diversity of career paths that were available in the institution. And finally, they also mentioned that these reforms helped to improve assessment practices and also contributed to organizational advancement in the sense of helping them to reflect on the change process. And also for some of them, they saw some improvements in academic activities themselves. So this is a snapshot of the results of the survey. I will leave then in the chat a link to a little bit more extended presentation on the results if you're curious about it. But then we can also see if you have any questions on this. So I will stop sharing now and hand over back to Helen.
Thank you very much. We are running, so this was a very rich presentation with lots for us to think about. And I do see now a question in the chat. We're running a little bit behind time. So Rita, if you think you can answer the question very quickly and concisely, please go ahead. And then I will hand over to my colleague Therese for the next part. So the question is that the survey results are interesting and helpful in understanding the current state of research assessment in Europe, but after 236 respondents, how many were from countries outside Europe and which countries were they?
Yeah, thank you, Ellen. So I will put, Francis, in the chat a link to slides where you can find this exact information, but there were very few, so it's like 4 or 5, but I will put the link there and then you can check.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rita. And thank you to Francis for the question, breaking the ice in a way in the chat on the questions. But over to our next presentation by my colleague Therese, who will tell us more about the staff dev results and how universities support professional development for teachers and how that relates to recognition and career progression. Over to you, Therese.
Hello, everyone. All right, I'll try to share my slides too. Bear with me, please. I think you can see them now. All right. Well, I'll also first start with a little poll, actually. Gemma, could you please help putting that on screen also for everybody? Do you think at your institution teaching is sufficiently recognized through assessment and careers? Big question. So now the pool is open. If you can answer. I think I'll leave you a few seconds still for people to participate. If you think that at your institution, teaching is sufficiently recognized through career and assessment. We have 101 participants to that one, and 60%, approximately 60% of you say no. But there are some yeses, so there is also some hope, let's say, in that area. All right, thank you very much. I'll close the pool, and I will go into my presentation right now. I think you can all see my slides. Just let me check if I can move them. Yes, I will just very quickly go through the context of what I'm going to present you. The findings I'm going to present come from the staff dev project survey that we opened for answer between April and July of this year, and we collected responses from 163 higher education institutions spanning across 40 European higher education area countries. Just to give you a quick taste of who exactly answered, most of our respondents were, let's say, middle-sized institutions between, well, you can see that on the slide, the green area between 7,500 students and 25,000 students. We also had a fair share of other kinds of university, other types of sizes. And also most of our respondents were comprehensive, multidisciplinary, research-intensive universities, or at least defined so. But we also had a fair share of specialized universities, university colleges, technical universities, and also music and art school to a lesser extent. So in this survey, we tried to find out a bit how staff development in teaching as such is organized, but how it is offered, but also generally speaking, the challenges identified with that and the linkages and connections identified with assessment, but also with career progression. And perhaps the first thing to say and to note here is that staff development in learning and teaching is mostly offered across the EHEA by individual institutions themselves. There are some national initiatives or initiatives led by national level or regional level governmental organizations, public agencies, but it's mostly the institutions themselves that are in charge of organizing it. And to some extent, for about 2/3 of institutions who responded to the survey, they can also be organized in a university network context, network being interpreted in a very large sense. It could be geography-based, it could be transnational, it could be discipline-based, etc., etc. When we asked about the purpose of offering staff development, so how it is perceived in the overall vision of the institution, institutions actually described it in their learning and teaching strategies as mainly connected to enhancing the quality of teaching. So the main general objective is that one. We can also see a fair share of institutions indeed saying that this is part of the institution's commitment to continuous professional development of the staff, so this lifelong learning perspective for their own staff. Contributing to career progression of teachers comes next, and it is also followed by the overall idea of committing to reach better parity of esteem between teaching and research, and also for 1/3 of institutions having answered that question to fulfill simply legal requirements when they are. How institutions see the value in staff development. Here, I think we can group answers in three tendencies or three strands. The first one is about really this idea of community building, how staff development contributes to community building and also well-being at the institution. There is one that I would call the institutional perspective, but also, of course, complemented by an individual development perspective. So in terms of community building, and that was really stressed by many institutions as quite important, staff development really contributes to create and maintain a sense of community and engagement towards teaching, towards the education mission of institutions, but it also contributes to teachers' self-confidence, provides mutual support, and also kind of helps to overcome frustration over sometimes common challenges. From an institutional perspective, it is also seen as a direct contribution to the institution's learning and teaching strategy and the overall culture of teaching at the university, for creating and maintaining a sense of accountability also towards what the institution offers, the education offer, and also supporting the institution's pedagogical vision, if any, across disciplines, across departments, with some emphasis on similar values and also competences. From an individual perspective, it is, of course, about supporting the implementation of newly acquired competencies, teaching competencies into classrooms, but also better informing teachers more broadly about their capacity to address transversal aspects. For example, the issues related to equity, diversity, and inclusion really came at the forefront when looking at that question for institutions, but also improving awareness among academics, among teachers, to engage students through active learning, for example, and also helping to tackle new challenges. And these and two contexts were underlined in that regard. The first one was, of course, the situations of emergency remote teaching during the pandemic. The second one is the AI, the rise of AI, and how to deal with that in a teaching context. So how is staff development organized? For the purpose of the survey, we tried to conceptualize a bit ways to address that at the institution through two definitions. Formal staff development, understood as training, courses, etc., organized by the institution with assigned learning objectives, with an assessment, and also of more general views, let's say, addressing a broad base of teachers across the institution. And in our survey, at least 96% of respondents answered that they do offer that. There is also the form of self-organized activities, organized by individuals, organized by groups, or also organized sometimes by the institution itself. The learning and teaching centers, for example, are very instrumental in that, but those are typically optional and they are more used also sometimes for specificities or for addressing immediate needs. So such activities can be, for example, events, teaching days to celebrate teaching, different types of workshop, peer learning formats, etc., etc. And under the staff survey, 71% of respondents answered that they offer that. Those two, of course, those two aspects are closely and very clearly intertwined. There is no easy demarcation line sometimes, I'll manage. Also because many activities were reported as organized by the institution in a structured way, but not including any form of assessment for those who participated in them. And in that regard, we can also see, let's say, a big variety and diversity of philosophies, let's say, behind the way those activities are offered, be it formal or more informal. I've put here some quotes that kind of reflects on that. For example, some institutions would rather see what they offer as starting points for participation in communities of practice. So basically, we kind of give some we give some themes to start with, and then the education community, the teaching community itself, kind of builds on that. We have other institutions who would rather see trainings as a baseline introductory offer to all staff starting to teach. But from there are more advanced offers that are more optional. We can also see that some people actually see informal or self-organized activities as little extras, really, but with a limited impact. But on contrary, some other institutions would rather say the more formal training there is, the more informal activities will appear. So they kind of benefit each other and complement each other. And the overall value of staff development and teaching will be better acknowledged in that case, contributing to build a teaching culture, etc., etc., etc. So I will move to my next slide. Whom does it address, and is that compulsory or optional? What we can see from the data we gathered under staff dev, clearly the newly hired staff are more targeted than other staff categories. But what we can also see is that there are quite some gray zones in terms of defining a course as compulsory or optional. Actually, that character might not be linked as such to the course, but rather to the status or the state of advancement in career and teaching experience of a person. So courses might not be compulsory as such, yet required for staff to take, for example, at some point in the course of their careers. What we can see, though, is that quite more decisively, it is compulsory for newly hired academic staff and also for teachers, assistant professors. More, for example, that was senior or associate professors or full professors. Interestingly, you would see that also in the graph here. Actually, there is not much that is made compulsory for staff following negative teaching evaluations. It is mostly optional, and we also saw in another question in the survey that there are actually not many offers, not many trainings that are designed specifically to address bad teaching performance, if I may say so. We can also note here that actually non-academic staff, but still involved in student learning, so support staff, for example, mostly are offered optional training and not mandatory ones. I'll move slides. Yes. Among the challenges that institutions identified for proposing and also organizing staff development, very interestingly, the one that comes really, really first and almost for all institutions was the question of time. So time required for teachers to participate even goes before the teacher's motivation to participate. And I guess it also relates really closely to the other options that you see here. Teaching is not valued enough in academic life, hence it's also difficult to have time to participate, etc., etc. I think we are running a bit ahead of time, no? Yes, okay, I'm looking at my chair, so I'll try to accelerate a little bit. I'm just showing now some results that come from another publication that some of you may know, which is the Trends Report of the UAs from 24. There is a QR code here if you want to access it. When looking at the connection with careers, what we can see first is that from the trends report, we found out that the role of teaching performance evaluations in career progression is actually there at half of the institutions we surveyed in trends. But in another 41% of them, it actually only plays a minor role compared to other criteria. And at the core of this discussion, there is also the overall question, how to assess teaching. So if we want teaching to take a proper role in the overall academic assessment area, how do we actually assess that? And the most widespread practice that we can see here at the level of the EHEA is still the use of student feedback, which is really widespread. But we also see voices that commented the need to actually improve how to approach teaching performance evaluation, so improve their practice. Complementary tools on the rise, let's say, would be, for example, teaching portfolios, as you can see here on the slide, and also peer feedback mechanisms. So what we can also see is that at the institutions, formal staff development, if they are there and offered, they do account for a career progression, sometimes in a permanent position or for staff in a temporary position. There are processes wherein staff development can be taken into account and need to be documented that are detailed also here on the slide. When, for example, academics start their position in the context of a periodic evaluation, when they have to renew a contract, or when they move from a temporary to a more permanent status. But what we can also see here is that there are clear differences between countries. For example, in Finland, in countries they are listed here as well, like Finland, the UK, Poland also, and also Sweden, it's quite widespread actually that staff development is taken into account in career progression. It's much less the case in countries such as Italy, Portugal, France, Czech Republic, and we also have Germany in there, for example. All right, I will conclude here by really pinpointing once again how self-development should be part of an overall teaching ecosystem and culture at the institution. It's not only about offering support measures, it's really about how it is encompassed and also tied together with the institution strategy, priorities, and also adequate support structures and recognition for the time and effort, of course, dedicated to improving teaching. And the way teaching plays a role in career progression is not always clear, also that we can see from our data. There are quite blurry zones between what is compulsory, what is an incentive, what is optional, yet still expected from individual teachers. Clarity in that area would be actually quite essential to see exactly what is granted as place for teaching at institutions. So the next steps of our project, we will address really the question of what works, exchange on practices, and I will say a bit more on that later on. Thank you very much. I'll handle the floor back to Helena.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Therese. Another very rich presentation with lots of things to discuss and think about. We do actually have a couple of questions in the chat, and since it is already rather late, it is a bit difficult to choose which one. So I will go for an earlier one, well, two actually. On the one hand, Olsa Kettis would like a link with more information about the survey. I imagine this might be difficult, but maybe there's something else you can put in the chat, maybe about staff dev in general, maybe some trends. But there is something certainly we can link to. Vesna would also like to know whether you can reflect a little bit on how to assess supervision quality and leadership. Would you have any thoughts or information, data on that? That's for you, Therese.
Sorry, about supervision and leadership. About supervision, not necessarily, but what we can see in the survey, through the survey, and this is part of those things that we, I didn't have time to present here, but will be published in the publication available late January. About supervision, what we can see is that when we ask for at institutions, what are your advanced offers, what we call advanced offers in terms of content for staff development, training courses, etc. Actually, supervision comes quite high, really, in the list of topics that are commonly offered at institutions. I couldn't cite a percentage right now, but I think it was quite high. The highest of all, I mean, the most common topic offered in those advanced offers is digitalization. as we might actually suspect from the current times we are living in. But supervision actually came quite high as well. The second question related to leadership, I think we actually had a whole set of data regarding leadership and also leadership in teaching more specifically. So really, how does that account for career progression, and also what kind of offers are available to support that? What we can see is that indeed it is accounted for in some institutions, not in great percentages, but still in more than a third of institutions, I think that answered, but also that most of the support measures the most important of support measures offered is probably optional training, and this is offered in about also a third of institutions, if I'm not mistaken. Those figures are in the will be in the report as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Therese. I think we might also have time for one more question for Rita before we start talking about the next steps. This question actually came to me directly, so you might not see it in the chat. So it's a belated question about the CoARA survey results. So Manon Kleutmans from Utrecht University saying that she's glad to see there are multiple indicators that were included for teaching. One of them was student satisfaction and feedback, but there is quite some evidence warning against use of student evaluation as a measure for teaching or teacher quality. So why was it included? Can you reflect a little bit on that? And if you could also put that into your answer, Manon would also be curious about measures for educational innovation, educational leadership, and educational scholarship, whether these will be included or developed in the toolbox.
Yeah, so on the question on the survey and how this was designed, let's say, so the survey was designed by the working group members, so a subgroup of them, and these indicators we mentioned here, they were not, so they were meant to be sort of encompassing of different areas, so with the teaching, innovation, research, etc., but they were not meant necessarily to be used by universities as such, so we just wanted to have an idea whether these broad indicators were used or not. But it is noted the comment on student satisfaction and the potential problems that can bring. On the second part of the question, so we're just starting to develop the ideas for the toolbox and what this will be, but there will be a part, of course, for the teaching. And for let's say innovation in teaching. So, but we have to see exactly how that will be framed and organized. But I would just add that if you have any suggestions on materials that could be used or should be reflected, please contact us, and we'll take that into account when designing the toolbox.
Thank you very much, Rita, also for this invitation to engage further. We promised you more information about the next steps, and Rita already provided the perfect segue for that. So I will start sharing again my presentation. And now I might actually slip a little bit into a speaker role, because now I can talk about the EUA Task and Finish Group on Academic Careers. I actually have the pleasure of co-coordinating this Task and Finish Group in my function here at EUA as a policy analyst in the Institutional Development Unit. So this EUA Task and Finish Group on Academic Careers closes a little bit the loop of all the EUA work on academic careers, academic assessment, staff development, which you have now received 2 sneak peeks into and which will still continue over the next year. And also from this Task and Finish Group, you can actually expect something next year. So this is a 1-year group consisting of 12 experts from 12 different countries in Europe. And they are currently working on key principles for attractive and sustainable academic careers. Since this is really a work in progress, I cannot go into much detail, also to spike your curiosity just a little bit more, but I can already say that the key principles will certainly cover links between academic careers with university societal mission, the diversity of staff profiles and career paths, which is a topic that we have addressed multiple times today. So it is absolutely central when talking about careers and assessment. The principles will also address the need for a collegial working environment, exchange and support among colleagues, among professionals in academia, the need for continuous professional development, recognition and rewards, as also mentioned before, and notably adequate investment in early career academics, since they are the future and you need those in order to maintain academic careers as a desirable employment path. We will launch the key principles of this task and finish group at the upcoming EUA annual conference, Connecting the Dots on Sustainability and Resilience, taking place in April at the University of Latvia in Riga. So stay tuned for this outcome, but there is so much more coming. Tell us, Rita, let's start with you.
Yeah, so on the CoARA Working Group on Academic Career Assessment, we will publish the full survey results together with the case studies and the lessons learned. So some key highlights from these exercises during this month. And then as we develop the toolbox, we'll keep the community informed on discussions on that.
Indeed, yes. And what else can we expect from the staff dev project?
Many things, among which some that are already happening, actually. I've put the link there. So as I said at the beginning, we are basically wrapping up now this knowledge finding and building up an evidence-based phase, and we are getting into the next exciting phase, which is really about community building, capacity building, and peer exchanges. So there is a call for participation to 3 thematic peer groups that will take place over 25. This call is already open. The call is, I think the deadline, Helena, is the 17th of January. So there is the link there. You can have a look and see if your institution would be interested. We typically recruit between 8 and 10, 12 universities per group. So for each of the thematic peer groups. The second thing I would like to underline, it's also published already too. It's for the first staff set, what we call the masterclass, and that will take place at the University College Cork in May. And this one is more like a 2.5 days retreat where you will have a mix of keynotes, work group, and also moments to reflect on developing an action plan, actually, that could also help your own institution and bring it back to your own institution. So this is more like a training the trainer kind of format, more capacity building oriented. And finally, and last but not least, at the end of January, we will actually have 2 publications, one with the survey results in the way I very, very schematically summarize them, and the second one with the results of focus groups that were conducted to complement these results. I also have to add on that on the 21st, I think, of January, we are also offering a second webinar focusing specifically on the survey results and the research results from staff dev. So stay tuned for that one as well. The easiest way to do so, because I see some requests for me in the chat box. Unfortunately, I cannot deal with all of them individually. Just subscribe to the EUA newsletter and you will receive all information on these activities to engage with us in due time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much also from me, both to the speakers, to my colleagues Rita and Therese, and to our kind audience for joining us today. Yes, there will be a recording and you will receive the slides with links included, so you can also access all available publications, calls, events directly through the slides. And you can then also share them with your colleagues in case they missed the webinar or in case you would like to revisit some of the information presented here. I hope you enjoyed joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again next time, maybe even on the 21st of January, as Therese mentioned, for more information on the staff dev results. Thanks for today and enjoy the rest of the day.